Let's say that you're working on a virtual assistant. Then, typically, at some point in the process, you are bound to ask yourself the question, how good is our assistant? And answering this question is kind of hard if you think about it. We could resort to metrics, for example. We probably have some scores for intent accuracy. We might also have a look at our entity accuracy. We can check how often our actions are predicted correctly. And although all of these metrics on their own are useful and deserve attention, it doesn't really paint a complete picture. After all, I've never really met an end user that's very much interested in the accuracy of the intent score. Instead, users typically want to be helped with a specific task. So if we're going to be looking for metrics that give us an impression of how good our assistant is, we should really acknowledge that these metrics are typically insufficient. And we are maybe looking for some other ways to measure how well our assistant is performing. To help answer this question, though, we have been working on a new feature called markers. I would like to stress that it's very much an experimental feature, and it's really meant also to help us at Rasa learn what works, but it is also a feature that tries to address this problem. While these individual model evaluation metrics are very useful, they are typically insufficient to really judge how well an assistant is doing. So in this video, what I would like to do is just explain some of the concepts behind this new markers feature, and to also give a very quick demo of what you can expect. So let's consider the following assistant. What you're looking at are the story paths that you can find when you run Rasa init. This is a demo assistant that is meant for tutorial purposes, but we're going to use it to highlight how the markers feature works. These stories describe an assistant that is able to cheer you up when you are unhappy. Immediately after greeting and greeting back, what a user can do in this assistant is they're able to declare their mood. In the case that they're happy, it is an easy path because immediately after, we're able to just reply, "We're happy that you're happy." However, whenever the user says that they are not happy, then something else happens. In that situation, we are actually trying to cheer you up. And after that, we are going to check whether or not the cheering up helped. In that case, the user can say, yes, it helped, in which case we can tell them that we're happy. And otherwise, the user can say it didn't help, and then the assistant will say goodbye. In this particular example, if I now start to think about how I might want to judge the overall quality of this virtual assistant, then I could think, well, there are many things that could happen in a conversation, but something that's of special interest to me is whether or not this cheering up actually has an effect. In fact, I can guesstimate two events that I would be highly interested in measuring. Namely, the user saying that it did help, and the user saying that it didn't. However, I would only be interested in this after we have tried to cheer the user up. I cannot just count how often the affirm intent and the deny intent are happening, because they might be used in different contexts in different conversations as well. So if I want to measure this, then I might want to have a file that defines markers that define these sequences of events inside of a conversation. And with such markers defined, I can then count how often they happen. So here's the idea. I'm able to define, let's say, the marker for cheering up failed. This describes a sequence of steps in a conversation. Namely, first we witnessed that your mood was unhappy, then we tried to cheer you up, we checked if that helped, and it didn't. On the other hand, I also have this other marker, cheer up worked, and here I'm describing the same sequence, with the only exception that cheering up actually did happen. The idea is that we are going to use our database with all of our tracked stories. And given such a database, we should be able to ask, how often did you see this marker? We can also check how often this marker got triggered. And that way, by counting, we might be able to say something like, hey, cheering up failed, that happened 100 times looking at our historical data, and cheering up worked about 250 times. Well, then these numbers are obviously imaginary, but now we would be able to say 250 out of 350 conversations, which is about 71%. It's these 71% of conversations where we were able to cheer a person up. And the thinking here is that this 71% might be a very meaningful number to track. It's a number that's very different than standard accuracy numbers because this number is actually representing the goal that you had in mind when you were designing the assistant. And the idea is that you as a designer are free to come up with whatever markers you are interested in. You can really start thinking about what events in your conversation matter the most, and this allows you to be very flexible in what you want to measure. Note that I'm only showing a simple example here. I'm creating a sequence of events that are happening in a conversation, but these only contain intents and actions. Markers will also support slots being set, and you're also able to do operations on these intents, so you can say things like, I don't want a specific intent to happen. But the main point here is that this is perhaps a more qualitative measure. What is interesting for your conversation is something that you can now properly think about, and we are providing you with a mechanic to start measuring. To wrap up this video, I will now give the quickest demo of this new markers feature. What I have here is my stories.yaml file from the Rasa init assistant with my sad path where cheering up worked and another one where it didn't. What I've also set up here is an endpoint.yaml file with a tracker store. I'm using the basic SQL tracker store, which in effect means that locally I'll be storing conversations in my SQLite database. Whenever you run Rasa shell locally with this tracker store on, you will also get this RasaDB file over here. And this database tracks the conversations. In fact, I will quickly show you, using a tool called dataset, what is inside of this database. Inside of this database, there is a events table. And if you have a look here, there's a couple of interesting things. We have a sender ID. We can confirm a name of an intent at times. We can also confirm if actions are being sent out. So I actually have a database here locally that contains the information I need to apply markers and to calculate these counts that I'm interested in. Now that we have an impression of the data that we can expect inside of a tracker, we can now start thinking about markers that we might want to count. And here's the two markers that I alluded to earlier that I'm going to use. It's quite basic. I'm just checking whether or not it helped to cheer you up. To run these markers, I can call the Rasa evaluate command. Inside of that, there's a markers subcommand, which will automatically look for a file called markers.yaml. And I can tell it to give me all the metrics from all the trackers, and I can also give it a name of a CSV file. It's going to generate more than just this one CSV file though, but let's see what happens when I run this. The command just ran, and a couple of files got generated. Let's first have a look at this stats overall.csv file. There's a lot of data in here, but one thing that we can see is that it's measuring a sender ID, a session ID, but that it's also tracking a marker, a statistic for that marker, as well as a value. For example, I can confirm that the marker cheer up failed has a percentage of session where marker is applied at least once of 50%. And I have the same statistic for when the marker actually worked. It's also 50%. This is because I ran Rasa shell twice, one with an example where it totally didn't work, and one where it totally did. I also have another file where I am getting the same numbers, but now per session, which allows me to zoom in just a bit more. But I also have this output.csv file that gives me a little bit more information. What I'm able to do here is for every single marker, track how many preceding user turns there were in a conversation before the marker actually got triggered. The reason why this is interesting is because sometimes a conversation has been happening for a while, and only after a certain point we will have a marker that's being triggered. And it could be interesting to know how long it took before the marker actually got triggered. If it took a very long time, then that might be an indication that something went wrong in the conversation. So that's why we are also tracking this. What I'm showing you here is a very new, but I should stress also very experimental feature that's going to be made available in Rasa 3.0. We are very eager to learn more about how people will use these markers. We do think in general that we have to go beyond intent accuracies to judge an assistant, and we like to think that these markers are the first step to allowing you to measure what matters for the user that you're actually trying to help. And that's very exciting. But I should stress this is an experimental feature, one that we expect to learn a lot from as we're going to continue developing it.